I think that a part of what goes on for coaches, whether they're ACC, PCC, MCC, or have no credentials at all, maybe it's a therapist, but the people who are really good at doing this are able to sit in that space of, I'm not attached to your outcome. I think of it as compassionate detachment. Hi, Lyssa deHart here. I got a really interesting question from Ice Candy on my YouTube channel. And so thank you, Ice Candy, for asking really good questions and sparking my mind for thinking about interesting puzzles to explore in the world of coaching. And so the question that came forward from Ice Candy was, one thing that fascinates me about PCC and MCC coaching is their ability to share observations without attachment and inviting the client to explore through verbal or verbal intonation. Marker 7.5. Can you give us new coaches tips on this? And so I'll just read you 7.5, which falls under the competency of Evokes Awareness. Coach shares with no attachment observations, intuitions, comments, thoughts, or feelings, and invites the client's exploration through verbal or tonal invitation. So I think that there's a short answer, which has to do with just this particular marker in the competencies. And that has to do then with, what is it that a coach is attached to when they're having a conversation with a client? So if I'm having a conversation with a client and the client says to me, what would you like to talk about today? And the client says, I really want to get some tools. I've been struggling with this situation at work and I really need some tools on how to handle it. And I go, and that's what the client wants to talk about. I'm pre-priming my brain to be ready to start solving this problem that my client is having at work, which goes into my mindset. What is my mindset about how I provide value? And I think this is a really important question for coaches to be paying attention to. So what is my value proposition for my clients? If my value proposition is I help you solve problems, it's going to be almost impossible for me to share anything with the client without having an implicit bias that what I'm sharing is of value to help you solve your problem. And that's what we do, right? We want to help people solve problems. And I think that is a reframe when we start thinking about coaching, because the idea of coaching isn't that I'm here to solve your problem, but rather through deep exploration, you will have insights and thus come up with your own solutions that actually fit you better. And so I think that a part of what goes on for coaches, whether they're ACC, PCC, MCC, or have no credentials at all, maybe it's a therapist, but the people who are really good at doing this are able to sit in that space of, I'm not attached to your outcome. I think of it as compassionate detachment, in the sense of, I care about my clients. I want them to have insights and awarenesses, but I'm not attached to how they get those. I'm much more attached to holding the space so that I can stay present with them and be curious. So as they're talking, what naturally happens, and you may notice this if you're having a conversation with a friend of yours, or your spouse or your kid or somebody you care about, not a client necessarily, it could be a client also. But as you're having a conversation with somebody and you're really present, they'll say something and it'll spark something in you. And you'll be like, oh, that makes me think of XYZ. And so I think in this particular regard, it becomes sort of a similar sort of thing where the client is saying something, they're sharing something that they are working on, thinking about, struggling with, whatever that is, and it sparks something inside of the coach. Here's where we let go of attachment, though. Something's been sparked inside of me. The client's talking about having some stumbling blocks in their business, and they really want to have some tools on how to move their business forward. And as the coach, I hear, I want to have tools to move my business forward, but I don't stop there. I get more clarity around what is it that are these stumbling blocks? What about that would be important for us then to explore that would allow their business to move forward? So we're starting to do much more exploration. And then as we're talking, as something shows up, I might share an observation by asking permission. May I share an observation that just showed up for me? And know that you don't, if it fits, great. If it doesn't, great, right? Like we don't have an attachment to whether or not the client's going to be like, oh, yeah, right. That's the most important thing I've ever heard in my life, because it's probably they've heard it before, more than likely. Or even if they've never heard it, it may not land on them as something useful. So there's a willingness to share something that shows up in a very open handed manner where I'm not attached to what the client is going to choose to do with it. I'm noticing that it's shown up. I'm sharing it transparently. But again, I'm not attached, because more important to me than the client, getting to a specific outcome, and I'm not giving them the tools, I'm just having a conversation with them where I'm exploring things that might be in these stumbling blocks that are important to the client to explore so that they can move forward. I'm just offering perspectives. It's a little like if you were out on a hike with somebody and you're walking along and the person, you and the person are having a conversation and you're like, oh my gosh, look at that incredible vista. Or, oh my gosh, look at that little flower. Or those rocks are really interesting, or whatever, right? Like we're not attached to the person going, oh my gosh, they're the most beautiful rocks I've ever seen. We're just pointing out something that we're noticing as we're out on this walk together, on this hike together. And I think that there's that piece of partnership in coaching that requires us to not be attached to the outcome, because most people have plenty of people attached to their outcome. They don't need their coach to also be attached to the outcome. They need their coach to be able to hold the space of curiosity so that they can come up with their own insights. From those insights, as a coach, we're still going to facilitate client growth at the end, where we say to the client, what are you taking away from today's conversation? The client's going to tell you, oh my gosh, I saw these really amazing rocks. I'm so glad you mentioned them. They make so much sense. They're going to work perfect in my garden. And what actions will support those insights? Well, the actions and become the tools that the client was looking for anyway, but they're going to be generated out of the insight that the client has. If instead what happens is I go into a coaching conversation, and I think this is what happens for a lot of newer coaches, is I have that idea of my value proposition. And my value proposition is I must give you client value for this time together. And the value isn't in the space that we're creating. The value is in what I impart on you. So at that point, the client starts to tell us, I'm got this business and I've got these stumbling blocks and I'm looking for some tools. And the coach keys in on tools. And there is a line drive to come up with as many tools as we possibly can in the amount of time that we have available for us to have this conversation, which is problematic on two levels. One, because the client is now in the seat of being told, so you have a power differential that just happened. From a transactional analysis perspective, the coach has just moved into expert role, which conversely moves the client into novice role. And so this isn't a peer-to-peer conversation or the coach being taught by the client. This is now the coach moving into expert role, and I'm going to give you a bunch of information. How many of you, and please all raise your hands right now if this is true for you, but how many of you enjoy being told how to make decisions in your life by other people? Yeah, I don't think very many of you are raising your hand. I'm not. I don't enjoy that. I am much more empowered when I get to suss through the issues that are bubbling below the surface for me, figure them out, uncover them, have insights and awarenesses of my own, helped and supported by the coach to be curious on my behalf because they're not attached to my outcome. So they can go, it looks like you're kind of swimming in circles right here, and I wonder what's going on. Or the terrain feels really rocky right here. What's that about? Or I noticed your facial expression as I said those words. What just happened? Or I noticed an energy shift that just occurred. What happened there? What are you noticing? And what we're doing is those are intuitions. Those are observations that we're sharing without attachment. I don't know what the facial expression means. I don't know what it means to be swimming in a circle. The client may not even know that they are swimming in a circle. And so my saying that might or might not click something in their brain. But if it's an experience that I'm having, I'm just sharing it. It's not that I'm sharing that I'm right, that they are swimming in circles. They may be like, no, I don't really feel like I'm swimming in circles. I feel more like I'm taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back and 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And so I feel like I'm moving in the right direction, but there are some step backs. What about those step backs is going to be then useful for us to explore as we're working towards whatever the agreement was that we agreed that we we're working on for this particular conversation. So a couple thoughts here again is that none of the markers and none of the competencies live in a silo. You're not going to just pull one of them out and be like, this is going to explain everything in this one thing. There's, in this particular idea of coach sharing with no attachment, is the degree of trust that the coach has in themselves to hold the space, that the coach has in themselves that they're enough to be able to hold the space and be curious with the client. It's around the agreement setting with the client so that the coach knows not only where the client is starting, but what's going to be important for the client to explore during the conversation, and ultimately what would be different at the end of the conversation if you were to explore fully this idea that the client has brought forward. So this competency and this capacity to be with intuition and to be with non-attachment is going to come out of the entirety of how the coach is holding the coaching container. And it's also going to come out of the stories that the coach is telling themselves about their value and what they bring to the coaching container and situation. So I hope this was useful and starting to kind of play with this idea of non-attachment. My invitation to you would be that you begin to kind of look at what is your belief system about your value as the coach. What do you see your job as the coach to do? And I hear from a lot of people, my clients would never accept that. I have to tell them something. That's the kind of clients they are. And what I would just throw out here as an observation, because I certainly felt that in my own way at one point in time, is that slowly over time in my own coaching journey, I've discovered that people actually don't really like to be told how to live their lives or what choices they should make. Hence the reason none of us raised our hand earlier. I mean, I think the only reason we want people to tell us what to do is because we feel indecisive about something. And that's the place then to be curious with somebody. How do you make decisions? How do you determine you're at a yes or a no on something? How do you determine there's enough energy in you to do the work that's required for X or for Y? How do you make these decisions? And not me telling you, well, you should just do X, Y, Z. That's what friends do, frankly. That's what family does. I know I do that with my friends and family sometimes. It's not coaching, though. I'm not sitting in the seat of a coach in that moment. I'm sitting in the seat of a friend. And honestly, I should probably be sitting in the seat of a coach, even with my friends and family. But, there you go. It happens, right? Where we're like, no, this is what you need to do. And so again, as we think about these comments, intuitions, thoughts, and things that the coach might share without attachment, I mean, part of what has you feeling attached to it and getting curious about that. Okay, so enough said. I hope this was useful. I think that I just rewrote a blog post that in which I actually talk about some of these things. I'll put a link below to the blog post, and I hope this was useful and see you on another video. Cheers.